Hey everybody, it's Kira. Sorry, my phone just went off with my alarm. So yeah, it's time for the weekly book talk. Here at Rawlings, craft closet is behind me, in case you were wondering. I'm actually going to be talking about a different book than I was planning talking about. I was planning on talking about a collection of short stories that were historical fiction about radical women. But then the massacre happened in Atlanta. We had another massacre. But I'm going to give you a quote now from Audre Lorde, who's an amazing poet and everyone should check out. The quote is, the cough is not part of the quote, I just have allergies. In a world full of turmoil, remember that joy is an act of resistance. So I decided that I was actually going to talk to you about this book called Almost American Girl. By Robin Ha. It's a graphic memoir by a Korean American woman who moved to the United States from Seoul at age 14 with her mother. Specifically to Alabama. And when she goes, she doesn't actually know they're moving. She thinks they're just going for a visit to see a friend of her mother's. And, so she doesn't pack a lot, and she leaves a lot of important things behind that she would have liked to have had. And turns out, something she also didn't know is that her mother is planning to marry the friend, who's a Korean man who's ended up in Alabama. So basically, Robin, whose Korean name is Chuna, is ripped from her home, where she had been really happy. She had a group of great friends who all loved the same comics that she read. Every week they would run, get the new comics. I don't know whether they drew as much as she did, but she draws all the time. She loved her neighborhood. She loved where she could go around the corner to get food, street food. She was happy. She was somewhat unaware of other things at that point, but she was happy there. And she's uprooted, completely uprooted, and has to settle in Alabama, of all places, for an 8th grade Korean girl who doesn't really speak very much English to have to start going to school. And she's also got a stepsister and some step-in-law cousins and stuff who either sort of ignore her or are outright cruel to her at times. There's no ESL at her school, so she's just thrown into the curriculum. And pretty soon is exposed to some racist bullying. And she's completely isolated and tremendously unhappy. She gets some letters from home. She gets some things from home that she hadn't had, which makes her happy. And she gets letters from home, which makes her very happy because they didn't forget about her. But she doesn't have any friends. She feels like she can't really make friends because she doesn't speak enough English to really communicate very well. And it's hard to learn when you're the only one trying to learn and no one's really trying to help you except for one teacher does take a real interest in her. was very kind to her. But eventually, her mother finds a comic book shop and takes her to this after they've had a big fight. So, I mean, Robin's mother has been the rock in her life, always there for her, whenever she needed it, whenever she was scared, whenever she needed her mom, she was there. And then she starts fighting with her for the first time, really fighting with her. And after they've been fighting and not speaking for a while, her mother demands that she come with her, and she takes her to the comic book store she's found. And Robin is overjoyed. Not only has she found a comic book store that actually sells manga, which the Japanese manga which she used to read in Korea, but there's also a class of comic book creation with all these other teenagers. So she signs up for the class, and then she's very intimidated. They seem to all know each other. They seem to be further ahead of her in terms of their drawing. But she meets her best friend there. Her best friend is Jessica. She's Japanese American. And Jessica just reaches out to her because Jessica asks her, do you know, have you read manga? Just, oh, yes, of course. And Robin hasn't seen anime, though. So she ends up going over to Jessica's house, and they watch anime, and they're just having fun, and they get along really well. And so she's there all the time. She's a little older, but they're great friends. And her English gets better and better and better. And her English gets so good that she's actually able to make some friends at school. So school is not so horrible anymore. She still misses a lot of things all the time. But now, at least she has some friends. She's rebuilding her life. She has a great friend in Jessica. She's making some friends at school. And by the way, it is a super white school. And finally she feels like, she's on some ground she can tread again or something. Then after some other things happen, her mother basically says that this marriage is over and that they're moving again. And once again, Robin is furious. Just as soon as I sort of rebuilt my life, now we're gonna go and some other place I've never been, don't have any friends, and I'm the weird foreigner, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And essentially, those in-laws have been pretty terrible to her mother. And so they leave in secret. They don't tell the in-laws they're leaving. And they go to Virginia. Robin being absolutely furious. But then she's the navigator on the way to Virginia. And she starts to think, I really need to grow up a little bit. Me being so upset with my mother is just putting more pressure on her. So she sort of takes her foot off the gas of the anger. And Florida's a lot better. First of all, Robin speaks a lot better English. Second of all, it's an international community. Her high school is filled with international students from all over the place because it's right next to Washington, D.C. And they have ESL. And there are Korean kids there. And it turns out to be really great. And she grows up, in high school. She develops in high school into the person who then goes off to college and ends up going to visit Seoul. And it's very different from how she remembered it. And she sees her old friends, and she sees how they're interacting, especially with boys. And so, while this book is sort of a beautiful glimpse in an own voice of Robin's struggles as a young, somewhat introverted woman who is an immigrant to the United States without speaking English, thrust into one of the whitest areas, and just sort of has to make it. And she does make it, which is just so joyful. But as much as it is about that, and as beautiful as that story is, it's also about the strength and determination of her mother. And this isn't something necessarily focused on, but the book, as much as it sort of develops, over time, does have these flashbacks, some of which she wouldn't have been present for, and that her mother must have told her about later. And you get to see that her mother was an utterly devoted mother, full of strength and determination to make it in a society which really had as a terrible taboo being a single mother. And she tried not to let that taboo affect her daughter. And she had to overcome a tremendous amount to succeed. And the choices that she made, though they seemed completely unfair to Robin, were as much in her interest to give her the freedom to pursue her dreams. This was the 90s, in a way that perhaps wasn't possible in South Korea with its sort of traditional patriarchal structure, which is what Robin sees when she goes back when she's in college. And it's a bit hard, she's in her old neighborhood, it's completely transformed. But seeing her friends interact with their, I guess their boyfriends, and the sort of interactions, and she says, I can't call myself Korean. And she realizes, I can't call myself American either, but I can call myself Korean American. And it's a really joyful acceptance of that term. And there's a great afterword about her mother and about the process of writing this memoir. And how her mother was a bit worried, about how she would come off. And I have to say that her mother comes off as a strong and wonderful mother. So a tribute to women as well as a celebration of the joy these two women pursue and eventually do capture as Korean Americans. And I just wanted to share that joy with you, even though the last week and a half, 2 weeks have been full of so much turmoil. Every week is full of turmoil these days because of the pandemic, but it was like it piled on, and I was very, very upset about both, and about Myanmar, and about militias Anyway, there are a lot of people being murdered, and in different places by different kinds of people for different reasons that none of which I really understand. But it's been a tough week. So I wanted to suggest this book that is quite joyful, though it has a lot of struggle in it. It is joyful and it's beautifully drawn. She did draw it as well as write it. Almost American Girl. Do check it out. It's great. And take care of yourselves. Okay? I mean, I know the news is always bad, but it felt a little worse. It was worse. For our state, it was definitely worse. And for our nation, never mind the rest of the world. But take some time, check in with yourself, make sure you're okay. Take some time just for yourself. Make sure you're taking care of yourself. And if you need help in that, then ask for help in that. Don't try and hide the fact if you're not doing well, if you need some help, ask for help. The world is in too much turmoil. We need more joy. I also want to let you know, next Friday, we're going to have an outdoor program at the library. We're just setting it up for you guys to do some drawing, sketching, and I'm going to give you some weird prompts. And you don't have to draw what I say. It's just a weird prompt, and whatever that inspires you to draw, then you draw. And we can talk, hang out. Hopefully the weather will be beautiful. And, we'll be 6 feet apart, but we can still interact 6 feet apart with each other. And I can meet some of you. So come on out. I didn't require registration or anything. Just come on out. It's going to be in the courtyard. And, there's also a magician coming tomorrow, if you're into that. 11 o'clock in the courtyard. But yeah, take care of yourselves. Find some moments of joy. They are absolutely resistance. Okay, take care of yourselves. I'll see you next week.